Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at David the Deliverer, 1 Samuel chapters 29 and 30. Chapter 29, verse 1, Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek while the Israelites were camping by the spring, which is in Jezreel. Now, we saw that back in chapter 28 and verse 1. Remember, it had come about in those days that they had gathered their armies for war to fight against Israel. And then in verse 4, they had gathered and came to Shunem. Now we have a flashback. We didn't leave them at Aphek. This is actually going back to before they got up to the valley of Jezreel. And so here we're back at Aphek before they've gotten to Shunem. They're at Aphek, and why have we done this? Because we're going back to see not what happens to Saul, but what happens to David. And so we read in verse 2, while they were still at Aphek, while they haven't gotten to the valley of Jezreel yet, they haven't confronted the Israelites. Saul hasn't gone to see the witch of Endor yet. Meanwhile, back in verse 2, the lords of the Philistines were proceeding on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were proceeding on in the rear with Achish. Everything is, again, looking back toward this upcoming battle. Verse 3, then the commanders of the Philistines said, what are these Hebrews doing here? We're going to fight Hebrews, and we've got Hebrews here behind our lines. And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, is this not David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who's been with me these days, rather these years, and I found no fault in him from the day he deserted me to this day? Of course, Achish doesn't know the whole story. David has actually been secretly helping out the Israelites, but Achish doesn't know that. Verse 4, but the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, make the man go back. We don't want David with us. Make him go back that he may return to his place where you have assigned him, and do not let him go down to the battle with us, or in the battle he may become an adversary to us. For with what could this man make himself acceptable to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of these men? He might take us out instead of taking the Israelites out. Verse 5, is this not David, of whom they sing in the dances, saying, and notice this song, we saw it way back early in 1 Samuel, it's still being sung, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Even the Philistines have heard the song, and it's not a song they like because they're among those thousands and 10,000s that have been slain. Verse 6, then Achish called David and said to him, as the Lord lives, you have been upright, and you're going out and you're coming in with me in the army are pleasing in my sight, for I have not found evil in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, you're not pleasing in the sight of the Lord's. So therefore return and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines. David is being sent out of the battle. For his part, verse 8, David said to Achish, but what have I done? And what have you found in your servant from the day when I came before you to this day, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Now, what's going on here? Is David really eager to fight against Saul? Or is David merely playing a part? I think it might be the latter. Verse 9, but Achish replied to David, I know that you're pleasing in my sight, like an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said he must not go up with us to battle. So then arise and early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who have come with you. As soon as you have arisen early in the morning and have light, depart. Verse 11, so David arose early, he and his men, to depart in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. That's where we left them off in the previous chapter. But now what we're going to do is follow David. We'll come back to Saul a couple of chapters from now, but we're going to follow David. Chapter 30 and verse 1. Then it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day. On the third day after, that is the third day after he has left. I have a friend by the name of Warren Gage who likes to say, whenever you see the third day, take another look, because you might see in there a picture of Jesus. And I think we might see the same thing. Notice he comes to Ziklag on the third day and finds that the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and on Ziklag. And notice, and had overthrown Ziklag and had burned it with fire, and they took captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great, without killing anyone, and carried them off and went their way. Ziklag was a dead city on the third day. Verse 3, then when David and his men came to the city, behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. Verse 4, then David and the people who were with him lifted their voices and wept until there was no strength in them to weep. They come to the city on the third day, and they find only ruination and destruction. Verse 5, now David's 2 wives had been taken captive, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. Verse 6, moreover, David was greatly distressed, because the people spoke of stoning him. They're blaming him for all this. For all the people were embittered, each one because of his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Notice David goes to God for strength. Verse 7, then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, please bring to me the ephod. The ephod is that outer garment that the high priest wears. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. Remember that Saul had inquired of the Lord through a medium. By contrast, and I think we are meant to see these two stories in contrast, by contrast, David inquires of the Lord through the high priest. Saul did not get an answer. David is going to get an answer. Verse 8, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this band? Shall I overtake them? And he, that is God, said to him, pursue, for you will surely overtake them, and you will surely rescue all. This is going to be a story of rescue. Saul's had been a story of judgment. This will be a story of rescue and redemption and deliverance. Verse 9, so David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor. Notice they leave Ziklag. They get down to this brook Besor, where those left behind remained. You see what happens in verse 10. He pursued, he and 400 men, for 200. There were 200 there who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor, and they remained behind. And he leaves part of his party behind, and he takes the 400, the stronger ones, and they go on ahead. Verse 11, now they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David and gave him bread, and he ate, and they provided him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins, and he ate. And then his spirit was revived. This fellow had been passed out, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. It had been as though he was dead too. He wasn't, but he was revived by this. David says to him, verse 13, David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? And he said, I'm a young man of Egypt, a servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind when I fell sick 3 days ago. He's been left there without food, without water for 3 days, for 3 nights, 3 days ago. Verse 14, we made a raid on the Negev, on the Sherethites, and on that which belongs to Judah, and on the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. This has been part of that same raiding party. Verse 15, then David said to him, will you bring me down to this band? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I'll bring you down to this band. He's going to turn on his former master and lead David to where they are located. Verse 16, when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing because of all the great spoil that they'd taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. They have won a great victory, at least so they think. Verse 17, David slaughtered them from the twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. Remember, David, he has 400 very tired men, but they're strong enough to keep on going. And he attacks with his 400, and he does a great slaughter. And the ones who escape number the same number that David's men numbered. and they flee on camels. Verse 18, so David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken and rescued his 2 wives, but nothing of theirs was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken for themselves. David brought it all back. It is a deliverance, and it is a complete deliverance. Verse 20, so David had captured all the sheep and all the cattle which the people drove ahead of the other livestock, and they said, this is David's spoil. They captured not only the things from Ziklag, but things from other places. And they say, okay, he's the leader. He gets the spoil. Verse 21, when David came to the 200 men, remember the ones that had been left behind, who were too exhausted to follow David, who had also been left at the brook Besor, and they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And David approached the people and greeted them. Verse 22, then all the wicked and worthless men among those who went with David said, because these 200, they didn't go with us, they couldn't keep up, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. But they don't get any of the special blessing. Verse 23, and David replies, David said, you must not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. You see, David recognizes God had given them the victory, who has kept us and delivered into our hand the band that came against us. Verse 24, and who will listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. They had a part, even though it wasn't your part. They had a part in this. Verse 25, we were told, so it has been from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day. This is going to be a continuing ordinance. Verse 26, now when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his friends, saying, behold, a gift for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord, to those who were in Bethel, notice in Bethel, in Ramoth, in Jatir, in Aroer, all these different places. We go into the next 2 verses. There's even more places, Raquel and the Jerahmeelites, to those of the Kenites, Orma, all these different locations. And we finish up in verse 31, to those who were in Hebron, to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to go. Everybody gets gifts. Notice what has happened. David goes and wins a victory. He delivers those who have been taken into captivity. And he comes back and he gives gifts to all. It reminds us of a psalm. It's a psalm of David, Psalm chapter 68, verse 18, where David sings, you have ascended on high, you have led captive your captives, you have received gifts among men. And Paul quotes this verse in Ephesians chapter 4. And he says, that's a picture of Jesus. Jesus is the one who died, who ascended on high, who led captives, a host of captives. He rescued those who had been held in captivity, and he gave gifts to us as a result.